Flashbacks, nightmares, dissociations, these are the very common symptoms of the post-traumatic stress disorder. And they also make people believe that the trauma is happening again. They make people believe that they are out of control. And also they are very, very frightening. Hi, my name is Patricia. I'm the counseling psychologist registered here in the UK with the HCPC. And in today's video, I'm going to be talking about trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder, and very common symptoms that comes with it. There are so many different types of trauma. So someone might suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder after trauma of car accident, after the trauma of rape, or after trauma of severe emotional neglect during childhood, or after maybe sexual abuse during childhood. But then it's also really important to add that people, they're gonna have different symptoms and they're gonna also experience them in very different way, and they're gonna be different factors that they're gonna contribute to that. And one of the very important factors, it will be the degree to which the fear was activated. So let's take an example of someone who grew up in a house where maybe there was no physical abuse, but there was a lot of emotional neglect and a lot of maybe verbal abuse. So a lot of intimidation, putting down, swearing, shouting. And this type of trauma can really activate certain ways of how we see ourselves, how we see other people. And that people who actually suffer from trauma in the past, now in the current life, they will have problem with regulating their emotions, and in certain situations, they might respond really emotionally disproportionately to certain situations. Additionally, they might have intrusive thoughts, but those intrusive thoughts that, we all have, all human beings have intrusive thoughts, but their intrusive thoughts, they're gonna actually cause them really significant stress. And very often they might actually feel irritable. They might have outbursts of anger and rage. In addition to that, they might behave on impulses. So they might actually take their major life decisions based on certain impulses. Very often people who suffer from trauma, they actually self-harm, or they have very intense suicidal thoughts. And many people who actually suffer trauma, they also complain about dissociation. So it is something like zooming out, and actually I'm going to be talking about it just a bit later. People as well who suffer trauma, they will have flashbacks and nightmares. So they're more of like intrusive thoughts, but they're much more intense, and the person feels like almost they have no control over them. And as well, people who suffer from trauma, very often they actually struggle to plan ahead and actually see in the future, and that will be perhaps then linked to feeling very helpless. And also very often people who suffered trauma, they actually experience this very intense guilt and shame and self-blame, and because of this shame and the guilt and self-blame, that is actually preventing them from, coming forward and asking for help. And then as well, perhaps because of that shame and guilt and self-blame, they have this sense of being really different than other people. And perhaps because of that as well, they feel like maybe no one will really understand, even if they will try to explain what has happened to them. They perhaps feel like no one's going to be able to relate to them. And what's also quite common, at least in some type of a trauma, in situations where the trauma involves another person, when there's an abuser, the person who suffers the trauma actually very often is confused about what they feel towards the abuser. Because perhaps the abuser might not be all bad. So maybe there was a times when the abuser was actually kind and caring towards the victim. Very often they disconnect from their own very painful emotions, and perhaps because of that they also struggle to relate, to connect emotionally with other people. Therefore, their relationships, they really struggle. So they struggle to engage in new relationships, and the current relationships that they have, very often they have many troubles with the interpersonal relationships. Another symptom of the post-traumatic stress disorder, it is dissociation, and we can compare it to maybe zooming out or being on autopilot. But dissociation, sometimes they can be actually quite severe. So people, they might just completely be cut off from the reality for seconds or even minutes. And in those times, they're not gonna know what's happening around them. So in that time of dissociation, the person is really struggling to integrate information from different parts of the brain. And dissociation can be also seen as a defense mechanism. So in a situation when the person doesn't feel maybe very safe, or feel really emotionally vulnerable, that's when this can happen, because then the person is taken from this uncomfortable situation. And very often as well, people, they actually recorded that in that state of dissociation, there's that sense of something unreal. It's almost like out of body experience. So sometimes they will describe that maybe they sit in a corner of the room and they can watch themselves maybe sitting on a sofa. And very often actually people who suffer from a post-traumatic stress disorder and who are going through dissociations, they actually feel a lot of shame when the dissociation happen. We can observe that in a therapy room when someone dissociates, and then you can actually see when that state of dissociation is finished, when they are like back to reality, that they are really, really ashamed, and perhaps they, to an extent, they believe that there's something abnormal about them, and they blame themselves that, I should be able to control that, I should be able to control my emotion, I should be over my trauma by now. And obviously dissociations, it's not something desirable, it's not something that even as therapists we would like our clients or people in general experience. But perhaps it is a part of a post-traumatic stress disorder, the same as nightmares are part of a post-traumatic stress disorder, the same like intrusive thoughts, the same as emotional avoidance. So in a way, the dissociation is actually preventing the person from integrating different informations together. And then at the end, because of that, then the person cannot really process the trauma information. And dissociations, they can actually be triggered by flashbacks and nightmares, because flashbacks and nightmares, they come with really strong, painful emotions. So yes, if you found this video any helpful, then please like it, subscribe, and I'm gonna see you in the next one then. Thank you. Bye.